Some heartbeats speak louder than words, and hers spoke only to me. I first noticed her on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that feels neither special nor particularly memorable. The cafe was crowded with the usual hum of chatter, the clink of spoons against ceramic cups, and the faint hiss of the espresso machine. I was leaning against the counter, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, when my attention shifted subtly, irresistibly, to her. She wasn't loud or flamboyant, yet somehow she drew every eye without trying. There was a calm authority in the way she moved, each step measured, each gesture graceful. Her hair caught the light as she tucked a loose strand behind her ear, and for a moment I couldn't look away. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, but there was something else, something delicate, almost fragile, that flickered in her expression when she thought no one was watching. I remember the first sound that truly caught me, her laugh. It wasn't a loud or boisterous laugh, but soft, musical, like wind chimes swaying gently in a summer breeze. I didn't know why, but hearing it sent a small, unexplainable thrill through my chest. And then there was her gaze. She wasn't looking at me. At least, I don't think she was, but when our eyes did meet for the briefest second, I felt a sudden, quiet electricity, like a current passing through an otherwise still room. I watched her browse the shelves, carefully selecting a book as if each one were a precious secret she had discovered. The way her fingers lingered over the cover, tracing the letters lightly, the slight furrow of her brow as she considered her choice, it all seemed so intimate, so profoundly human, that I felt an unusual longing, a curiosity I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just her appearance, it was the aura she carried. There was experience in her movements, a sense that life had touched her in ways I couldn't yet understand. And yet, there was warmth there too, a softness that suggested vulnerability beneath the calm exterior. It made me wonder what her story was, what moments had led her to this quiet corner of a bustling cafe on a Tuesday morning. And then, as if noticing my attention, she looked up. Our eyes met again, and for a heartbeat, I swear I could hear the silence speak. There were no words, only a faint, mutual awareness of each other, a fleeting recognition that something about this encounter mattered, even if we didn't yet know why. My chest tightened slightly, not with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating anticipation. I never introduced myself that day. I didn't even move from my spot. But as she walked away, the faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, a soft mix of vanilla and something woody, grounding and inexplicably comforting. I realized then that ordinary days could change in a single heartbeat, that a simple encounter could leave a trace that refuses to fade. And in that trace, I knew I would see her again. It wasn't planned, of course. Life has a way of placing certain people in your path repeatedly, and she seemed determined to appear just when I wasn't expecting it. A few days after that first fleeting glimpse in the cafe, I found myself walking down a quiet street, lost in thought when I saw her again. She was browsing a small boutique window, her fingers lightly brushing the fabric of a coat as if testing its memory, its story. Our eyes met, and for a fraction of a second, the world felt smaller. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words lodged themselves stubbornly in my throat. Instead, I nodded, a barely perceptible acknowledgement, and she gave a gentle smile in return. Nothing dramatic, nothing that demanded attention. Just a quiet recognition, as if we were both aware of the improbability of these repeated encounters. Later that week, it happened again. The library of all places. I was searching for a reference book, my fingers running along spines in a row of forgotten wisdom, when she appeared at the end of the aisle. She was bent over a book, hair falling softly around her face, the dim library light catching just the right angles to highlight the subtle warmth in her features. I hesitated, not wanting to disturb her, yet unable to look away. And then it happened. Our hands brushed, lightly, almost accidentally, as she reached for the same volume I had. A spark traveled through me, brief and shocking, like a soft current jolting through still water. I noticed how her fingers lingered, the faint warmth of her skin brushing mine, and a pulse quickened somewhere deep inside me. Her eyes lifted, meeting mine with that same quiet curiosity, and I felt a strange mixture of vulnerability and exhilaration. Even the smallest things began to carry weight. The tilt of her head as she listened to someone speak. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear with a subtle, unconscious grace. The faint scent she left behind, a mix of vanilla, something woody, and a hint of rain-soaked earth, seemed to follow me long after she had gone. Each encounter left me unsettled, aware of a tension I couldn't quite name, but couldn't ignore. And yet, she didn't speak to me. Not yet. That was what made these moments so potent. Every brush of hands, every fleeting glance, every shared space between us was loaded with possibility. The ordinary became charged with meaning, and even the mundane act of noticing her became an event in itself. I found myself looking forward to these chance meetings, though I wouldn't have admitted it to anyone. There was a subtle, unspoken dance between us, a rhythm I hadn't learned yet, and each encounter drew me closer, layer by layer. I was aware of the age between us, her quiet confidence, her measured movements, her life experience, but that only deepened the fascination. By the end of that week, I realized something undeniable. She had started to occupy space in my thoughts that no one else could reach. And though we hadn't exchanged a single meaningful word, I felt like I was learning her language. One of gestures, glances, and faint heartbeats that spoke louder than anything words ever could. It happened by accident, or at least that's what I told myself afterward. I was caught in the sudden rain, the kind that starts quietly, almost imperceptibly, before drumming relentlessly against the streets and rooftops. I ducked into a small bookstore, shaking off droplets from my hair and coat, only to find her there as well, standing between tall shelves like a figure painted into a warm, private world. She looked up, startled for a brief moment, and I realized I'd been staring, not out of rudeness, but because the sight of her was somehow grounding amidst the chaos of rain and crowded streets. "Seems the weather has other plans for us today," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Her lips curved into a soft, almost shy smile. "It does," she replied, her voice calm and melodic, carrying the faint warmth of familiarity I hadn't yet earned. That first sentence, simple and almost trivial, felt like a key sliding into place. Suddenly, the air between us was charged, lighter yet more intimate than before. We wandered the aisles together, speaking quietly, sharing small observations about the smell of old books, the soft rustle of pages, the way the rain outside painted streaks across the windows. Every glance felt loaded. Every gesture, deliberate or accidental, seemed to speak volumes. When she reached for a book, our hands brushed again, and this time I didn't pull away. Her skin was warm, soft, fleetingly alive against mine, and my pulse betrayed the calm I tried to maintain. At one point, she laughed softly at something I said, a sound like gentle wind over dry leaves. It made my chest tighten in a way I didn't understand, but I liked it. She didn't just laugh. She let herself be seen, let me glimpse the small cracks in the carefully composed life she carried. And I, in turn, felt my own walls subtly shift. Then there was the moment by the counter, when she absent-mindedly tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, exposing the curve of her jaw and the subtle warmth of her neck. I noticed how naturally she carried herself, how a lifetime of quiet confidence made even the smallest movements feel intentional. I wanted to reach out to offer some kind of reassurance, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned just slightly closer when she spoke, catching the faint rhythm of her heartbeat through the wrist she rested near mine. It was so close, so human, and for a moment, the noise of the world faded. The conversation ended far too soon. She had to leave, and the air felt suddenly empty, as if she had carried the light with her. Yet there was a change, a subtle acknowledgement, unspoken but undeniable. We both knew that something had shifted, that what began as curiosity was now something more complicated, more tender. I stepped back into the rain, watching her disappear down the street. and realized that this first conversation, this fragile bridge of words and gestures, had altered something inside me. I wasn't just aware of her presence anymore. I was aware of the quiet way she had begun to inhabit my thoughts, my heart, even without meaning to. For the first time, I understood that sometimes words aren't enough, and that the things left unsaid often matter most. After that first conversation in the rain, the world seemed to shift imperceptibly. Our encounters became less accidental and more familiar, small, almost mundane meetings that somehow felt extraordinary. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was in the quiet moments where everything seemed to speak louder than words. We started meeting in small, unassuming ways. A shared table at the coffee shop, a bench in the park where the autumn leaves painted the ground in gold and amber, or wandering the aisles of bookstores, letting our fingers brush over the same spines in casual coincidence. Each of these moments carried an intimacy that words could hardly capture. I remember sitting side by side on a park bench one afternoon. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wet earth after an early morning drizzle. She reached for her coffee cup, and our shoulders brushed lightly. It was nothing deliberate, yet the warmth that traveled through that simple touch made my pulse spike in ways I couldn't control. There was a comforting rhythm in it, a quiet familiarity that felt like discovering a language I didn't know I could speak. She laughed at something a stranger said passing by, and I watched the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the softness in her expression that softened the edges of the world around her. Every small gesture, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, leaning slightly closer to read the title of a book, the subtle way her fingers lingered near mine, was a signal, quiet but unmistakable, of a growing connection. Our conversations remained gentle, measured, layered with a mix of curiosity and unspoken understanding. We talked about books, music, and fleeting thoughts on life. But more than anything, I listened to the way she spoke, the pauses, the small inflections in her voice, the rhythm of her breathing when she laughed or frowned. I realized that in these quiet moments, I was learning more about her than I could have imagined, without her ever needing to state anything explicitly. One evening, we found ourselves walking along a dimly lit street, the air tinged with the scent of rain and asphalt. She fell slightly behind me, then caught up, and our hands brushed, not awkwardly, not hesitantly, but with the ease of people who are beginning to understand a mutual rhythm. I could feel the warmth of her hand grazing mine, and my chest tightened as if my heart were trying to speak. It wasn't just the touches that mattered. It was the way she carried herself, the way her presence felt like a quiet anchor amidst the noise of my own thoughts. In these simple, unremarkable moments, a bond was forming, one of comfort, trust, and subtle emotional intimacy. By the time we parted that day, I realized that I was beginning to crave these quiet moments more than anything else. It wasn't about passion or declarations. It was about the steady, reassuring sense of closeness. I was learning to hear her heartbeat in the spaces between words, to feel the unspoken connection that had been growing with each brush of hands, each lingering glance. And for the first time, I understood that intimacy doesn't always roar. It sometimes whispers in the gentlest, most ordinary moments. It happened on a day that began like any other, yet ended with an unexpected weight settling between us. We had planned to meet for a walk in the park, though neither of us said so explicitly. We both simply appeared, as if drawn by the same unspoken thread. The sky was overcast, the air thick with the scent of impending rain, yet the atmosphere felt strangely intimate, private, as though the world had softened around us. We wandered along a winding path lined with tall trees, leaves rustling underfoot. She spoke quietly about her week, about the small frustrations of work and life, and I listened, catching every nuance in her voice, every slight tremor that hinted at fatigue or worry. And then, unexpectedly, she stopped. Her eyes met mine, steady and searching, as if she had been gathering courage all along to share something she had been holding in. She began, and her voice faltered, catching just slightly. She glanced down at her hands, fidgeting with the edge of her scarf. "I've been feeling overwhelmed lately, more than I can put into words." There was a pause, heavy but unspoken, filled with an intimacy that didn't require explanation. I stepped closer, careful not to crowd her, yet instinctively aware that the distance between us felt too vast. "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to," I said softly, letting my words fill the space without pressure. "Just, I'm here." Her eyes flicked up, and for the first time, I noticed the subtle vulnerability hidden behind her composed exterior. Her lips curved into a faint, almost hesitant smile. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, almost imperceptibly, her hand brushed mine, light, fleeting, yet charged with something unspoken. I felt her warmth, the softness of her skin against mine, and for a moment, my heart threatened to betray the calm I tried to maintain. The confession didn't end there. She leaned slightly closer, her shoulder brushing mine as she continued to speak in quiet, uneven bursts. She spoke of moments of doubt, of feeling unseen despite her outward composure, of the loneliness that sometimes wrapped around her like a second skin. Each word, each pause, was a gift of trust, an invitation into a part of her that few people ever saw. I reached out, letting my fingers graze hers, offering a silent reassurance. "You don't have to face any of this alone," I murmured, and she allowed herself a soft exhale, a sigh that seemed to release something she had held in for far too long. In that moment, it wasn't about romance or attraction. It was about connection, about presence, about the quiet acknowledgement that our hearts could speak without the need for words. We walked in silence after that, side by side, closer than before. Every glance, every brush of hands, every shared breath carried the weight of what had just passed between us. I could feel her heartbeat, steady yet tinged with emotion, through the brief contact of our wrists. It whispered more than words ever could, and in that whisper, I knew something profound had shifted. For the first time, I realized that emotional intimacy could be as intoxicating as desire. That vulnerability could build a bridge far stronger than casual conversation ever could. And I also realized with quiet certainty that I was willing to cross that bridge with her, slowly, carefully, and completely. The evening was quiet, almost fragile in its stillness. We had decided to meet at a small, dimly lit cafe near the river, a place where time seemed to slow down and the outside world faded into a soft blur. The golden glow of the hanging lamps reflected off the wooden tables, creating pockets of warmth that felt almost like a sanctuary. We sat across from each other, our conversation flowing easily at first, but with the subtle pauses and pauses that spoke louder than words ever could. She stirred her tea, watching the steam curl upward, and I noticed the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders. It was one of those rare moments where every detail seemed amplified. The quiet clink of her spoon against the cup, the faint fragrance of her perfume mingling with the aroma of coffee, the soft, rhythmic beat of her heart echoing in my awareness. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, I found myself leaning slightly closer without thinking. She responded in kind, her shoulder brushing mine lightly, a feather-like contact that sent warmth traveling up my arm. It was unspoken, unplanned, yet it felt as if our bodies were finally acknowledging what our hearts had already known. I could feel the subtle tension, not of desire alone, but of closeness long yearned for, of comfort wrapped in the promise of trust. At one point, she laughed at something I said, a soft, melodic sound that filled the space between us. I reached out almost instinctively, resting my hand briefly on hers as if to steady the moment. Our fingers didn't intertwine yet, but the warmth lingered, the contact silent yet profound. I could feel the pulse beneath her skin, a quiet rhythm that spoke of life, vulnerability, and trust. She shifted slightly, and our knees brushed under the table. My breath caught, not from surprise, but from the gentle intimacy of the touch. It was a connection that didn't demand words, that existed purely in the shared awareness of proximity, in the shared heartbeat of that quiet cafe. I noticed how naturally she allowed it, how the faint incline of her head toward me seemed to invite closeness without expectation. The moment stretched, delicate and tender. I reached for her hand again, this time resting it over mine, letting our fingers align lightly. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand remain, soft and warm, the pressure subtle yet electrifying. The world outside seemed to dissolve, leaving only the quiet rhythm of two hearts acknowledging each other. By the time we stood to leave, a faint hesitation lingered in the air, unspoken but palpable. We walked side by side, close enough that her shoulder brushed mine occasionally, each contact a gentle affirmation of what had begun. In that simple, tender closeness, I understood that romance wasn't always about grand gestures or declarations. Sometimes, it was about letting someone into the intimate space between heartbeats, letting the quiet speak the words that couldn't be said aloud. And in that first physical closeness, I realized something profound. Connection isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's a soft brush of fingers, a shared breath, a heartbeat that whispers secrets only the soul can hear. The world seemed quieter that evening, the kind of stillness that makes even small sounds feel profound. We had walked together to a secluded corner of the riverbank, where the gentle flow of water mirrored the soft glow of street lamps and the occasional flicker of distant traffic. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of damp earth and faint blossoms from nearby trees. It felt as though the city had paused, allowing only the two of us to exist in that fragile, intimate bubble. We sat on a low stone ledge, shoulders brushing lightly, the proximity comfortable yet thrilling. There were no words at first, just the quiet awareness of each other, the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the warmth of her hand resting near mine, the rhythm of her heartbeat that seemed to echo in tandem with my own. It was a silence that held more meaning than any conversation could, a delicate language written in touches, glances, and shared breaths. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and steady, carrying a warmth that made my chest tighten. I've been waiting for this," she said, her hand moving slightly, brushing against mine in the most unassuming way. "Not for anything dramatic, just this. Quiet, simple, and real." I turned to face her, catching the faint glimmer of emotion in her eyes. "Me too," I admitted softly. "I felt it since the beginning. Those moments that no one else would notice, the small touches, the looks that lingered. I've been waiting too." Our hands met, fingers intertwining naturally this time, and it felt like the culmination of all the subtle tension and quiet encounters we had shared. Her warmth was steady and grounding, a quiet reassurance that the connection we had nurtured was real and mutual. I could feel her pulse beneath my palm, a gentle rhythm that seemed to whisper everything her words could not. She leaned closer, resting her cheek against my chest, and I felt the steady cadence of her heartbeat through the thin fabric of her coat. It was a heartbeat I had memorized in my mind long before this moment, one that had spoken to me in fleeting brushes of hands and lingering glances. I pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head, feeling the softness of her hair and the warmth of her presence, as if the world itself had shrunk to this single, perfect point. We stayed like that for a long while, talking in quiet murmurs, sharing fragments of our thoughts, our fears, our hopes. Every word, every pause, every small touch felt sacred, a confirmation that the bond we had built wasn't fleeting. It was real, tender, and patient. The age between us no longer mattered. It was only the depth of understanding, the careful nurturing of trust, and the willingness to be vulnerable that defined what we had. As we finally rose to leave, we walked side by side, hands still entwined, a quiet smile shared between us that spoke volumes. There was no rush, no urgency, only the knowledge that this was just the beginning of something profound, a connection that had been whispered in heartbeats long before words could catch up. And in that final lingering moment, I realized her heartbeat had always been trying to tell me something. It had spoken in quiet touches, in fleeting glances, in the gentle rhythm of ordinary days. And now, at last, I could hear it fully, and I could finally answer.